Thank you all so much for joining us today for our town hall with our special guest, Vice Principal, Academic, and Dean William Gough. So just some housekeeping items. We will start with the land acknowledgement, introduction of our hosts, and then introduce the topics that we will be discussing today. Additionally, if anyone has any accessibility and or access concerns, please feel free to use the chat function to communicate with our PSSA execs, especially Farah and Waleed, as they will be responding and directing your questions and concerns to Kelly and myself. So first off, we will start with the land acknowledgement. So the Political Science Student Association wishes to acknowledge the land we work, study, and socialize on. The land we stand on today is of the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. As settlers in Canada, we've directly benefited from the colonization and genocide of the original caretakers of this land. PSSA acknowledges and is grateful for the space and privilege we occupy as we serve the student body at UTSC. As students, we understand our Indigenous peers have historically and systemically been disadvantaged at educational institutions such as UTSC, and we're here today working towards creating an inclusive and equitable platform to help students from all walks of life and continue to support students in whichever means. So if Kelly, you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Kelly. I am the Vice President of Administration for the Political Science Student Association here at UTSC. I'm a fourth-year student doing a specialist in political science and a double minor in IDS and public law. And yourself?
Hi, so my name is Ramsha Rahman. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the current Vice President Academics at PSSA. I'm going to my fourth year, doing a co-op in City Studies and a double minor in Urban Public Policy and Critical Migration. So today, the topics of discussion will be tuition, mental health, academic integrity, and communications. And so now we'd like to introduce the Vice Principal, Academic, and Dean William Gough. If you could give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure, happy to do so. Thank you all for hosting this event. I think it's important to continue the dialogue with students, especially as we face unprecedented times with our response to COVID. I'm a professor of climatology from the Department of Physical and Environmental Science. My graduate appointment is in the Department of Geography. I was hired at UTSC in 1993, and I study, my research area is climate change, particularly climate change impacts in the Eastern Arctic, largely focusing on sea ice, and the impacts on local First Nation and Inuit communities. So I really appreciated the land acknowledgement that you provided at the beginning of this session. I also do climate studies in for this area, city of Toronto and Southern Ontario, and also some tropical climatology with students studying tropical cyclones. In 2015, I became the interim dean, and then a year later became the dean, the vice principal academic and dean. And in that role, I oversee 16 academic departments, obviously including political science, but also the other departments that you're taking minors in, and many more. I oversee the creation and delivery of all academic programs and courses, the development, the hiring, and development of the great faculty that you have teaching your courses and doing research at the University of Toronto. And also oversee the Registrar's Office, the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Library, Arts and Science Co-op, and the Doris McCarthy Gallery. So that kind of is an introduction to what my role is. So do you have some specific questions maybe that can move us forward?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you so much for your introduction. I don't know if Kelly, you can unmute yourself as well, or yeah, okay, yes, perfect. So yeah, Kelly will go on from here.
Okay, yeah. So our first big topic for today is tuition. Many students are very concerned with the cost of tuition during the pandemic. Um, I guess before we move on to tuition, can you tell us a key difference between um, in-person learning and remote learning?
Thank you, Kelly. That is a key issue. I think that does relate to the tuition fee discussion. So at the University of Toronto Scarborough, we actually pioneered remote learning over 15 years ago when we introduced what you may know as the web option. So there are a number of courses that are offered at UTSC that provide students with the option of remote learning. And this is particularly true for first year psychology, but it's also available for other courses. So we're not new to remote learning on this campus. And there's been other examples on the other campuses and at other universities. The flexibility that remote learning provides, it allows students that may have difficulties getting to campus, either because of work schedules or family obligations, or just the distance that they have to travel to get here. So there have been many advantages to a web option over the years, and students have appreciated that. When we first introduced web option in the early 2000s, it came through the Department of Psychology, and they did some testing to see whether the educational experience and the outcomes were different between students that took the in-person or took the remote class. And they did a statistical analysis and they published it, and they found that there was no differences in the outcomes. The students were learning, were not learning less in the remote offering, or more for that matter. It was statistically not different whether they took one option or the other. So we were fairly confident when we had to very quickly pivot in in March, as most of you experienced, to remote learning in order to accommodate the restrictions that were being placed upon us by public health. And admittedly, the large scale transition was not easy for students. It was not easy for faculty or staff, but we managed to get through the term. Of course, because of the government restrictions, all courses this summer that many of you are taking are all remote offering. So those are part of the issue. I'd say that we do get feedback from some students that definitely prefer in person, and we get feedback from students that say, "Wow, they didn't realize how great remote learning was, and it meets a number of their needs." Some students feel uncomfortable in classrooms for a variety of different reasons, and they felt much more comfortable in an online environment. That wasn't true, as I say, wasn't true for everyone. Some of them do, some students do flourish better in person. But we simply didn't have any other option this summer, and we don't really have any other option in the fall. Although there will be some um, elements to some courses that
Okay,
can be
thank you
taken.
so much.
Go ahead, Kelly. Go
Oh,
ahead.
my, sorry, it lagged a little bit, yes.
Okay.
Please continue.
Well, that's it. No, I kind of covered the sort of remote versus in person. Of course, happy to answer any more detailed questions on that if you have it, or if others maybe in the Q&A have some. But I think you wanted me to link this to tuition.
So because many students are concerned with the cost of tuition, so we wanted to ask exactly how is UTSC structuring their tuition and incidental fees to cater to the whole remote learning situation?
Okay, so so just to be clear, the tuition framework is not simply a UTSC framework. It's a U of T framework. And tuition considerations are governed by the governing council and approved each year. That said, and then just to explain a little bit about domestic fees, or domestic fees do not cover our costs. We actually get government grants to subsidize the education for the domestic students. Not true for the international students who pay full full tuition. What we're doing this year is there's clearly, as we move into the fall and including the summer, there were certain aspects of being on campus that weren't available to students. So the incidental fees, which I don't handle, that's actually handled by the Dean of um, Student Experience and Wellbeing, Desmond Puat. They've reduced the incidental fees, and this is through a schedule that is published by the Provost's office. And this will continue into the fall, and they're now thinking through the winter term, and they'll, in due time, make an announcement by that. So these are fees that appear as incidental in your statement. Obviously, since TPASC wasn't available this summer, there's a reduction in those fees, etc. Now, some of the features that are offered by Student Experience and Wellbeing, such as the Center for Health and Wellbeing, have services that remain available. Sometimes the consultations, of course, are done virtually, and this will lead into a discussion of mental health. Those services are available. Obviously, if you had paid for parking, that got refunded because no one's being charged for parking at present at UTSC. I'm on campus today, and there's lots of parking. No lack of parking at the moment, but it's not being charged. From the academic side, in addition to our tuitions, we do levy some incidental fees. For example, those of you that have taken science courses, there are lab fees that are levied. There's fees in arts, culture, and media that are levied. So all those incidental fees have been canceled for this year because we're not having in-person labs. So those expenses don't exist, so we're not charging you for it. Now, for those, like for example, the Department of Biology will be offering labs that are online, and there is an expense associated with that, but we're covering that ourselves. We're not passing along those expenses to students. So where we can, we have reduced the fees.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for answering that question. I think that's a very significant topic that we need to address as a student body. And of course, I know everyone here is curious about what the tuition situation is going like. As a student, in my personal experience anyways, I grew up in Scarborough, which is kind of recognized as a predominantly immigrant and working class community. And so growing up in such a community, we still feel like as the students that with these fees being charged for remote learning, it's sort of a difficult pill to swallow just because it's difficult to get physical access to the certain resources that are being paid. Like you said earlier, that certain health services are available on campus, but because of the pandemic, it's just not as accessible, especially being in the Scarborough region, kind of suburbs of Toronto. How do you deal with students who are discontent with this proposal that you have for the tuition?
So thank you, Kelly, and I do appreciate the lived experience of being in Scarborough and transit challenges and et cetera. One thing that I want to point out is that it's not cheaper for us to offer courses remotely. So that is an assumption that many people have not really questioned. And in fact, I've increased the TA budget and technical support budget for the fall to enable a more seamless transition to online or remote learning. So we're not saving any money by doing this, and in fact we're spending more. So I just want students to be aware of that. The other piece too is that our instructors are thinking through very carefully what the learning objectives of courses are and how to meet those in a remote or online environment. Of course, some courses have already done that because they've been doing web option for years. So Psych 101 would be AO1, excuse me, would be a prime example of a course that's really developed over the years how to deliver in an online remote fashion. So the value is there, even if you may not see it. And the points that you're making are valid. So there are some in-person pieces, particularly from the student experience side that you're referencing, and those fees are being reduced.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. I just wanted to ask a following question, and forgive me for laying it down because this is an opportunity to really address this issue. As a student who also experienced remote learning from all three campuses, I've taken classes at UTSC, UTSG, and UTM. I did notice that the services that were provided during the pandemic is just not, I guess, on par with the services that were provided before the pandemic. So I guess my question really resides in, will UTSC be offering services that are on par with in-person learning during the pandemic for the upcoming year? If so, how? If not on par, how does the university plan to justify these additional costs?
Okay, and that's a great question, Kelly. So I mentioned earlier that I've augmented the TA budget. So the idea here is to provide more a contact time for students. Building cohort, feeling connected is something that's critically important when you're doing online work. That special care needs to be taken so that um, you're taking advantage of the media that you're using effectively, but also trying to address some of the issues that you're missing from an in-person piece. So that's why we've augmented that. I've also augmented the budget for facilitated study groups. So there are a number of, especially early year courses where students sometimes struggle, where we've developed facilitated study groups for courses in the sciences and elsewhere. And so we've doubled the budget there so that we can create more of those groups. Of course, in the summer, we had some, they're all online. In the winter term, they were all in person. So we pivoted to online. In the fall, public health restrictions permitting, we will have some of those in person and many, of course, online. So we're looking at ways in which especially for our first year students, and I know cohorting is important for you as well as upper year students, but if you picture what the experience would be like for a first year student coming in, especially if they're coming in, you know, maybe they're the only person from their high school that's coming to be enrolled at U of T or UTSC, developing that sense of community is critically important. So we are devoting resources to doing that.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just have a final question before I give it off to my co-host. The economy is very tight right now. And so will there be financial support for students who are in need of additional help paying tuition for the upcoming year? And if so, what does it look like?
Yeah, and I agree. You know, many people are suffering at the moment. I have two brothers, and they both were unemployed for a number of months. One of them's now working, another one hopefully will be working in September. So it's a lived experience for me as well and for my family. So I do understand that. I understand that many students have parents that haven't been able to work or have been on CERB or other assistance programs. There have been assistance programs for students, but that will be ending. U of T does have a very generous emergency fund. I think we've spent over $5 million since the beginning of COVID to assist students in various ways. So if you are a student now and you're contemplating maybe not being a student because of finances, do connect with our registrar's office and become available and speak with a financial aid person who will be able to outline a number of options if you're in need. But we understand that. We understand how many students are hurting, especially if you were anticipating having a summer job and didn't have it. This can place you in a difficult situation. We also are expanding co-op opportunities and work-study opportunities on campus so that there's more employment opportunities. They'll be, largely virtual, but there will be opportunities for students to work.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that's it for the tuition questions. Rimsha, would you like to continue with the mental health questions?
Thank you so much, Kelly and Professor Gough, for answering those questions. So now I just wanted to touch on mental health because it is a rising concern for many of us right now, living at home, I guess, in the same environment, and even for some international students and independent students who are living by themselves, they've expressed mental health concerns during this time period. So I just wanted to ask, what is UTSC doing to support these students during the pandemic?
All right, Rimka, that's a great question, and it's an issue that has concerned the administration. We do know that even prior to COVID, that there was an increasing number of mental health issues among our students. Some of this is a result of students being more open about expressing their mental health concerns. And on that narrow level, that's a good thing. It's good that students that are struggling to identify that they are, rather than letting it go untreated. We do have a health and wellness center on campus that has been operating virtually for a few months. They do have mental health supports in that group. There's two things that can happen. One is that they can deal with the issues that the students are facing themselves, like they're manageable locally, or they can connect them with community resources if things are more serious, or if it's better for them to be looked after but within their own community. So either way, some of it's referral, some of it's handled locally. One thing I can announce is that it's a very tight year financially for the university, but nevertheless, the executive has approved the hiring of additional mental health support individuals in the Health and Wellness Center because of the demand and our desire and our need to respond to that demand. So the concerns have been heard, and we are moving forward with that. But sometimes it can be handled locally. Sometimes we look to local hospitals or other agencies that including social work that can help with some of these issues.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to move on to another question that I guess a few students have been very curious about is, in light of like the pandemic, what can we expect from administration in terms of academic integrity processes? Because I understand a lot of our exams will be now remote, and integrity is also a topic of discussion that should be addressed. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I really appreciate that students are asking this question because it's tricky. It's the remote environment is not easy to monitor what the activities are and to ensure that the work submitted is done by the student. We know that and we know it's a challenge. In some instances, for example, we piloted in the April exams software called ProctorU, which enables us to monitor students and their computers while they're writing an exam. And we received actually mixed results because of did not work well for 2 exams, and we had to run one of them over again. Not very convenient for students, very upsetting. In other cases, instructors are rethinking how they do the evaluation in the course and whether there are different ways to do evaluation than the standard highly weighted final exam. Probably less so in your discipline, but very high percentage of the final exam in the sciences is very, very common. And so they're rethinking how they do that. But I'll be honest with you that I wouldn't say that this issue has been entirely resolved. And I will also want to point out that this was not an issue. This was an issue prior to COVID. We are always looking at ways in which to improve this. Every time we do an innovation, the students figure out a new way to get around us. So we're always on our toes with that. Some of that is being careful to not repeat questions, because exams have a way of taking on their own life and moving from student to student to student. So making sure that we're doing original evaluation is critically important. We do that with assignments. So there's a number of things that we do to try to cheat-proof of courses. And I know that this is critically important, especially for students that are. It's critically important for all students. But if you're a student that has never been tempted to do that, you want to make sure that your mark is reflective not only of your performance, but that it isn't overshadowed by faulty performance by others. So I totally understand the concerns here, and it is something that we are working on and continue to work on. As we eventually move back into in-person, we may look at looking at how we can do in-person exams first. We do have areas on campus like the event center, which at present could sit 500 students for an exam, and is probably could do 200 under the current social distancing rules. So this is something that probably we'll look at in the winter as a possibility, also depending on what the public health rules are. And
Thank you
also,
so much.
I just want to also make the point that we're making a guarantee for students that start the year remotely, that they can finish the year remotely. So any experiment we do along those lines has to be done in a way that ensures that those that cannot be with us are not unfairly treated.
Mhm. I agree. I just wanted to follow up on that. Even during like the course of the semester right now, I guess some professors have very much flagged academic integrity as an issue. But in relation to that, I would hope that administration is a bit more lenient during this time, considering there are a number of factors that are affecting students' ability to write exams and to study in general. So I just wanted to quickly ask if how does how do you guys oversee that process when it comes to like if you do catch a student cheating, how does that process look like?
Well, there is a well-established process. If an instructor has evidence that a student has cheated on a particular aspect of the course, at a certain, if it's an assignment that's worth 2%, the instructor will deal with that themselves. Anything above 10%, it gets triggered that it has to go to higher level. Typically, first offenses are, a stern warning, but repeat offenders are the ones that we pursue. So there is a sense of you need to, especially for a first-year student, learn what the expectations are, and the expectations may be different from what you had in high school, and we have to be clear on that. We try to be clear on that in the syllabus, and instructors try to be clear on that. But even if something does happen, there's usually we try to do an educational piece first.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll be moving on to our last question. It is about communication. So how is UTSC maintaining transparency and improving student communications with their students? For example, personally, I've been having a lot of difficulty getting in contact with financial aid. So I just wanted to flag that. What else can UTSC do to improve student experience in terms of communications?
Yeah, well, and thank you. And in fact, when I saw that question, I thought this is an opportunity for me to learn what is actually getting through to students. There have been some broad communications that we've done. There's been letters that I've written, both on what was happening. Actually, three things: what was happening this summer, what's happening in the fall, and what's happening in the winter. And anecdotally, we've through students that we're aware of in the dean's office, through students that have been working in the research labs, we realized that not all the details are getting through sometimes. So what I asked our registrar's office to reorganize the communication. So the registrar's office has a series of FAQs. So even when I write a letter, I don't assume that everyone will read and memorize all the details in the letter. So I say, let's break up the letter into a series of frequently asked questions and post those answers so that students, it's not just students, but staff and faculty need to know all these details as well. And so there's I can just pull this up. Let's see, something called Students-U Together 2020, which is part of the UTSC website. And if you go there, then there is a list of questions and answers that I think are very helpful for students. In addition, there is a way to ask further questions there as well. There have been some communications I've sent. Either I send them through the Dean of Student Experience and Wellbeing, Desmond Pouillat, because he has the email list of all of you. But our registrar's office, turns out, also has that list. So some of the communications have come as a letter from me to you. If you are having struggles connecting with financial aid, do write to the registrar and don't keep pushing us until we meet answer your questions. I mean, I can't guarantee that every question will be answered in a way that you were hoping it would be answered, but at least it shouldn't be answered with silence. So keep persisting. And I do know that there's been an incredibly high volume that we've had to deal with. We have reassigned staff members to help out in areas of high demand during the COVID period because of the inquiries that are coming in. But every once in a while, something may fall through the cracks. So please don't hesitate to keep communicating.
Yes. Additionally, we wanted to ask, like beyond monthly email updates and town halls, is there something that UTSC is focusing on doing to improve student relations with administration? Because we realize it's a really important time to be informed by the decisions made by administration.
Sure. And so I did participate in a couple of town halls. Last week, one for incoming students and another for returning students. And similar concerns were raised there. So if this is an effective means, happy to continue to do so. We also work regularly with the SCSU, so your student government, and they will bring issues forward of concern that they're aware of. We're open to other means of communication, so we're using the frequently asked questions. We do have an excellent group, a marketing and communications group that monitor social media, and they often raise issues with me. They'll say, oh, students are asking about tuition, or students are asking about credit, no credit. That was the big topic in April. So there's a number of, so we do look to social media as well to pick up on the issues that are, I mean, I even occasionally go into Reddit to find out what students are really thinking. So there are ways in which we try to monitor what students are thinking, but we certainly welcome direct communications like this invitation today to speak to you. Absolutely support that.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of credit, no credit, in the initial in the initial outbreak of the pandemic, we were extended the credit, no credit policy, which is great, which is wonderful. But a lot of the students who are actually asking some of the questions right now, they've been sending in questions, know that the downtown campus actually had the option to see their grades before conducting the credit, no credit option. Yet the same type of option was not offered at UTSC. So I guess our students' question is, why is that the case? And also in general, why is the same university extending different policies across all three campuses? because I know students are actually really rifled up about this topic. So I wanted to ask you as we have this opportunity to talk today.
All right. Well, and I deserve it. I raised the issue. I was the one that made the decision. So you're asking the right person, and I fully recognize that it wasn't a very popular decision that was made. It was a decision consistent with the Mississauga campus, and there was discussion with other deans. Every faculty has the right to set their own policies at the University of Toronto. So we were within our rights to do so. The circumstances in the Faculty of Arts and Science is different than our circumstances. We needed to pivot quickly to a summer session. That's a 12-week session. That isn't the case with FAS. They do have a summer session, but it isn't as critically important as ours because 3,000 of our students are in co-op. And so the summer session is actually very important as a 12-week session for our students. So there were logistical and timing issues that would have made the practice that FAS did very difficult. And in fact, what they found it was in implementation, it was very challenging for them. And the students that were taking their summer courses didn't get information early. So it was mid-May to late May before they got that information when summer courses had already started. The provisions that we made were actually unprecedented. In 2015, there was a strike, TA strike, and we did not provide the same level of accommodation as we did this year. So it was extraordinary to do that. We also had programs that were very concerned about credit, no credit. And in the interest of what, and how that seeing your mark before you make the decision may impact on admission decisions. So there were a number of factors that were raised both by the chairs of our departments and by the registrar's office in the way that we would move into the summer, and the fact that we felt that these provisions were already unprecedented. I mean, I fully recognize how difficult it was for students beginning a term in person and then on March 12th, hearing that things are going to completely and utterly change. So it was not only were faculty remarkable, but students were remarkable in stepping up to these occasions. And so we did make the other provision that we made is that you could drop a course much later than you had in the past. But I recognize that some students were not happy and were contrasting us with what was happening elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much for answering that question. At this time, we would like to open the floor up to our students, our participants who are in this group. So if you have a question for our dean, please send them in. We actually did get quite a few questions, so I'm just going to read it out. So one of them is that for incoming students, what measures will be placed to ensure that they will have a smooth transition into first year? And for those who are graduating as well, next year, how will graduation be affected? And just these types of questions. And for students who are interested in graduate school but cannot get access to professors on campus for references, is there any policies that's been implemented to help support students get references for graduate school?
All right, so I saw 3 questions there. They're just great questions. So in terms of first year students, we recognize how tricky this is. We have a limited in-person experience that we are planning to have on campus. But as you can imagine, with social distancing, even our largest classrooms can't hold the number of students that we're used to, and we're still under a 50-person restriction indoors. So limited offerings on campus, although we will allow up to 400 students in our residences, and we still have the first year guarantee. But we also want to make it welcoming for students that, for a variety of different reasons, either because they physically can't move to Toronto, or they perhaps are living in a multi-generation home and they don't want to add to the risks of elderly relatives. simply don't want to come to campus. And there may be other individual health reasons for not coming. So we want to make sure that that experience is good. The orientation, from what I understand from student wellness, well-being, student experience and well-being, will run in a virtual mode. And we're getting better and better at handling those things and breakout rooms and things like that for additional uh, uh, activities. And as I mentioned earlier, the facilitated study groups will particularly focus on first-year students to give them that sense of cohort. I've also asked a number of professors to develop some special extracurricular segments. For example, some of you may have noticed that UTSC sometimes appears in movies. We have 2 film professors at UTSC that are developing UTSC in the movies. And it's going to be a montage of the movies that UTSC is featured in, so that those that are remote from UTSC will see the buildings, will see it in a different setting. Sometimes they're scary settings, but interesting settings. We have an award-winning environmental science professor who wrote a book called Ontario Rocks. And so he's developing a special lecture on Scarborough rocks, looking at the geology of the region. And we have a group called Culinaria that looks at food, and they'll look at Scarborough food. So we're looking at ways in which to celebrate what Scarborough is all about, even if you're not actually here. So we're looking at different ways to make students feel welcome. And then when they do come in a year or so, they can explore the various things that they've heard about. And I'm hoping you, the senior students at UTSC, will be particularly find ways to be particularly welcoming, especially this student association, of ways of looking at encouraging students that are coming into your programs to feel welcome. So it's been very much on my thought of what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think every student should buy a t-shirt or a sweatshirt that has UTSC written on it, show up in their classes in swag. So.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was question number 1. Question number 2, if you're ready to graduate, like in other words, you're within 5 credits and you're planning to take those credits, and I've asked all the units to ensure that that students that are normally on track to graduate will be able to do so. If there are certain elements to their degree that are very difficult to offer remotely, I'm asking them to come up with other alternatives, either other courses that they can take and substitute, or other ways in which to meet the learning objectives that for those courses, so that there's a pathway to graduation for every potential. Obviously, it has to be within reason, in terms of the number of courses that's needed. So that's one piece. The other piece, in terms of graduate school, this is of particular interest to me. I'd like to encourage as many pathways to graduate school as possible. Students on the downtown campus are surrounded by, 16 professional faculty, so they're in that milieu. Well, when you're at UTSC, the connections aren't as obvious. And we have a number of combined degree programs that allow pathways into graduate programs. But what was identified in this question was critically important, is that is getting references from professors. Our professors are still available. Many of them will still have office hours. In our generation, the mode of communication is largely email rather than other social media platforms. So I would suggest you email those professors. And I know that virtually every student that's ever asked me for a letter has gotten one.
Thank you so much for answering that. We have another question.
Sure.
Regarding asynchronous and synchronous classes. So one of the questions is, I believe some professors are choosing to give participation marks. However, is there a standard that UTSC will be implementing in regards to how professors should be marking synchronous and asynchronous classes?
Well, that's a great question. It is not unprecedented to give marks for participation, and there's various thresholds that need to be met in order to earn participation. So it isn't necessarily just showing up. Sometimes you're required to speak or those guys. So that's up to the individual instructor. Usually it's not for a huge a portion of the marking scheme, usually less than 10% of the grade that's associated with this. What we're trying to be very careful of is situations in which it's very difficult for students to access lectures synchronously. And this has to do in relation to the connectivity that they have in their home, and particularly if they're living in a remote location. So if although it can happen in Scarborough as well, if you don't have great connectivity or if you've got younger siblings that are using up all the bandwidth, I get it. So we're trying to be very careful of that. One of our best practices directives is to ensure that students can have access to to lectures, even if they're synchronously offered, to make sure there's an asynchronous or like a taped version of the lecture. So we're being very careful about that piece. Students are also encouraged, if it's a non-mandatory course, to look at the syllabus and make it what's a good decision for themselves.
Thank you so much. So I believe we're going to open the floor to the rest of our participants and see if they have any burning last minute questions. So if anyone would like to speak, feel free to unmute yourselves. Give it a couple of seconds. Okay, yes, no, does anyone want to ask? Oh yeah, we have it in the chat. Okay. So one of the questions in the chat, I can read it out loud.
It's about laboratories. Okay. So what's going to happen? Well, in the fall, there are no in-person laboratories. In biological science, they've purchased software to do virtual labs. In physical and environmental science, they're doing videotaping demonstrations, and then you do the lab from there. We are hoping in the winter term to have a limited number of labs that cannot be offered remotely available. However, we're making the guarantee that those labs will also be offered in later terms, like next summer or next fall, for those students that can't be physically here. So we're trying to figure out ways in which to laboratory space is actually fairly spread out. So a laboratory that can hold 48 students can be socially distanced to 24 if you just don't have a lab partner. So they're in some respects, that's easier than some classrooms. And so we just didn't feel comfortable doing that in the fall, but if conditions permit, we will start offering those in the winter, but we hear your concern.
Okay, thank you so much. Kelly?
Yeah, and so I think we are running out of time for today. This has obviously been a very insightful discussion, and I'm sure the students here will leave with many of their questions answered. I guess to end off the discussion, I wanted to ask you something personally about yourself, Professor. You obviously hold a very tremendously important role in our UTSC community. What has been your proudest moment as Vice Principal of Academics and Dean for UTSC?
I mean, I have proud moments almost every day. I'm so impressed with the faculty and the students at UTSC. What I'm proud about, particularly this year, is how everyone pivoted in the face of a pandemic. I mean, the qualities that emerged among the students, among the staff, and faculty were deeply, deeply inspiring. You know, it was a huge, I mean, it was an unprecedented circumstance we were in. It would have been hard to forecast how students and faculty would have responded. But I'm really, really impressed. I mean, and I'm not, don't want to diminish the fact that some people had a very difficult time, but I would say the majority have really stepped up and done remarkable things under very difficult circumstances. So that would be my proudest moment.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, this concludes our town hall today. Again, thank you so much, Vice Principal and Dean, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to address these concerns that we have. It's honestly an honor to have you in our podcast, which will be actually posted via our YouTube channel for PSSA, so please stay tuned for that. And yeah, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. And until next time,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much.